galaxies, but the humans did it anyway. They arrived in world ships, physics-defying behemoths, the mass and size of planets, roaring onto our galactic shore at blistering speeds, bristling with disturbing weapons and impenetrable shields. Each ship was a technological wonder beyond anything anyone had dreamed possible. Clearly, they were superior in technology and arms to any known species, but would they be a threat or an opportunity? The first to find out were the Picori, an empire of aggressive isolationists, scarred by centuries of war. They did not even consider greeting the humans peacefully when they entered the galaxy through their borders. Perhaps things may have gone differently if they had. Instead, they attacked on sight, and so the humans rolled through their fleet as though it was not even there. Thousands of ships were vaporized instantly. They didn't even slow down. The humans sent out a message. What had happened to the Picori was unfortunate, but they had been attacked. They came in peace, and were here to save the galaxy.
"Submit peacefully,"
they pleaded,
"and you will come to no harm. In the name of the greater good, we will set you truly free."
The galactic community at this time was a complex web of alliances, dominated by warring factions of ancient enemies. In an era of constant war and strife, in which slavery and genocide were common and struggle and sacrifice were mundane, none were open to trusting the humans, and so their pleas fell on deaf ears. The destruction of the Picori had sent shockwaves across space as every empire scrambled to defend themselves, and the humans were greeted with hostility at every turn. To their credit, they showed restraint. They begged and pleaded with every empire to submit peacefully, but after millennia of war, none could swallow their pride in the face of a fight. Soon, their reputation preceded them, and the word human became synonymous with death and destruction. Their titanic world ships had no choice but to descend upon the galaxy like a plague. Seemingly impervious to all weapons, it did not take long for every major homeworld to have a human world ship looming in its orbit like a loaded gun. They promised they were bringing salvation, security, progress, and plenty. But the reality was that within a year, every living being in the galaxy had been forced into servitude. Propaganda flooded all comms, preaching about the greater good. Every being had a part to play if they were to be saved, though from what the humans never said. It was a time of great change. Technology so advanced as to seem occult became commonplace. An intergalactic network was created, allowing for instantaneous transfer of information across impossible distances. A standard currency was introduced, and species were forced to coexist and cooperate with each other as they never had before. Despite all this, they were not benevolent masters. Productivity ruled above all. Beings grew old and died working the same job they were assigned at adulthood. The wondrous technology was used only to strip mine planets of their resources and further the material gain of the humans. The galaxy was converted into an advanced and convoluted chain of production, in which every non-human was a tiny, insignificant cog. None knew their purpose in the machine. There was no choice, no freedom. They painted themselves as saviors, but after all, flowery speeches about shared destiny, unity, and the common good fall on deaf ears when you spend every hour working your fingers to the bone in a dark mine. They had a saying, an iron fist in a velvet glove, that described their attitude. They were not above treating their slaves with smiles and kind words, but if a planet didn't meet its quota, they would introduce production initiatives to improve things. The velvet was removed to reveal the iron, the teeth behind the smile grew pointed, and the kind words turned hard. If you treat beings as tools, it is inevitable that they will rise against you. It was very early on when the Alethi rebelled. They saw themselves as honorable warriors and could not tolerate the idea of being trodden beneath the heel of the humans, never mind the fact that they had been employing slaves for millennia. The humans dropped a single bomb on their homeworld, releasing a virus that tore through the population in days. They were decimated, and within a week, the workers had been replaced with other species from off-world, with barely a blip in production. In their announcement, the humans spoke at great length about the greater good of the galaxy, and shared responsibility to the future. "You think us monsters," it said, "but we are nothing compared to what we are trying to save you from." Most assumed it was a falsehood, invented to lend plausibility to their heinous crimes. It was shamefully dishonorable, but effective in its messaging. The will of the galaxy was broken, and none rebelled after that. Fewer than 100 cycles passed like this. The downtrodden masses lived and died in servitude until one day the order was given to cease production. For the first time since their arrival, the galaxy once again ground to a halt. The day the humans had been preparing the galaxy for had finally come. Another extragalactic visitor had been detected, arriving from the same direction they had, so long ago. It was far sooner than they'd expected, they said, with only a cycle left before their arrival. The screen changed, and the beings watching the announcement were united in collective horror. Ships, millions upon millions of them, some many hundreds of times the size of the humans' world ships, were barreling through space towards the galaxy. Sinewy and gray, ridged with spikes and oozing ichor, they appeared shaped from living flesh. The humans referred to them as the Pursuers, a race of ravenous, mindless monsters, twisted and malformed, endlessly hungry. The greater good had been real all along. They had been fighting them across the universe for millennia, trying in vain to eradicate them once and for all in a series of desperate last stands. They had arrived in the galaxy ahead of them to unite and guide the species there to victory, for the Pursuers' only goal was to consume, until the complete and utter decimation of all life. In every previous galaxy they had visited, telling the populace about the Pursuers had caused such widespread panic that informing them only served to seal them to their fate, ruining their chances at survival. The galaxy's only hope was to bend to the humans' rule, to organize and prepare, entrench itself and fight until the bitter end. Immediately after the announcement, the humans finally revealed what they had been producing with the century of slave labor. Towering humans in powered exoskeletons arrived on every planet with vast caches of weapons, armor, and vehicles. Entire populaces were transported off-world to be trained in space combat. Every being in the galaxy, old enough to fight, was to be trained, armed, and sent into battle against the enemy. The humans were not truly the dictators they had been believed to be. The perceived lies about the greater good had all been genuine. They only regretted that they had not been honest about the Pursuers sooner, to give them more time to prepare. The galaxy saw a different side to them then. What had previously been seen as aloofness revealed itself as quiet fortitude. The brutality with which they drove the workers was really determination. Everything they had done had come at the expense of the people, true, but it had genuinely been done for the greater good. The Pursuers, when they arrived, were everything the humans had promised them to be. Mindless savages, intent only on destruction and consuming every living thing they could find. There was no method to their madness, just sheer weight of numbers. In space, they would launch wave upon wave at the Allied fleets with no regard for themselves. Their ships were impossibly fast and could somehow sense sentient beings. They would aim themselves at enemy spacecraft, ramming them at near light speed before sprouting limbs and tearing through the metal. The world ships and their supporting fleets, now crewed by the former slaves, were in constant combat. Any defeat in space would allow Pursuer ships to make planetfall. Once they landed, millions upon millions of drones would throw themselves tirelessly at any living creatures they could find, ripping them to pieces and devouring them in moments. The fighting was brutal. Billions of lives were lost daily, as the coalition of species led by the humans fought desperately for their survival. They were few in number, but on land and space, the humans fought like warrior gods, always where the fighting was thickest, never tiring, never wavering. They inspired those around them to fight harder, to never give in, and even sometimes to sacrifice in the name of the greater good. The war went on for decades, and at times seemed lost, but the bravery, preparation, logistics, and tactics of the humans snatched victory from the jaws of defeat time and time again. The cost was dear, trillions of lives were lost to the Pursuers, but in the end, the galaxy was victorious. It had been a long, bloody, and torturous war, such as had never before been seen. Cities had been leveled, planets thrown out of orbit, and soldiers returning to their homes found them empty or destroyed. Not knowing how to rebuild, They turned to the now beloved humans for help. But they were gone. No fanfare, no celebration. The surviving humans just sailed off into deep space in their world ships, towards the closest galaxy, leaving behind the fruits of the labor of 100 cycles. Technology and resources enough to render scarcity impossible for the rest of time. Shortly after they left, a message arrived from the direction the humans had traveled in. It read,
"We are sorry. There are others we must help for the greater good. Now you are truly free, even from us."
Humans don't have rules for war. In the vast interconnected tapestry of the cosmos, Earth's humans were largely considered peaceful. Designated as a Level 2 species by the Intergalactic Federation, they were seen as minor players, involved mainly in commerce and diplomatic endeavors. Everything changed when a rogue member of the Federation instigated a conflict over a resource-rich expanse of disputed space. This territory, nestled between stars and replete with minerals, became the eye of a storm that threatened to disrupt the tenuous peace that had held for centuries. The humans were roped into the fray not by choice, but by unfortunate circumstance. Their diplomatic vessel, the Emissary, while in orbit around the aggressor's homeworld, was obliterated by an errant plasma torpedo. The ship's destruction, resulting in the loss of hundreds of innocent lives, was dismissed as collateral damage by the aggressors, a grave mistake. In the grand scale of galactic conflicts, many races had their own legends. The Drakarians had their fearsome star fleets. The L3 had unmatched psionic warriors, but the humans, they were known for their diplomacy, their unyielding pursuit of peace. Yet there was a side to them that very few outside of their home planet knew, a chapter from their history books written in blood and fire. On Earth, wars weren't always governed by rules. For weeks following the unprovoked attack, the galaxy saw no overt response from humanity. Trading vessels came and went, and human representatives attended interstellar conferences with their usual grace and politeness. To the uninformed observer, it appeared as if humans had accepted their loss. But in the shadows, far from prying eyes, gears of war began to turn. Battle groups from the human fleet, silent and undetectable, positioned themselves near key enemy installations. Elite commando units, the best Earth had to offer, were dispatched to infiltrate and sabotage. A lone human diplomat, Ambassador Lena Dre, was sent to the High Council of the belligerent race. In the Grand Chamber, under the gaze of countless eyes, Lena calmly addressed the alien council. She recounted the unprovoked destruction of their ship and the innocent lives lost. She spoke of Earth's desire for peace and understanding, yet her words were met with dismissive laughter. "Your ship was in the wrong place," the council leader sneered. "A Level 2 species should know its place. Depart our space or face dire consequences." Lena, undeterred, replied softly, "We hoped for understanding, for reparation. But remember, when Earth is pushed, we don't always push back in predictable ways." 2 days later, chaos descended upon the aggressor's empire. Their mightiest warships vanished without a trace. Frontier outposts went dark. Communication lines were eerily silent. Vital installations suffered catastrophic failures. Within a week, a once proud militaristic civilization was brought to its knees. Without firing a single public shot, without a declaration of war, the humans had exacted their vengeance. The message was clear. Do not mistake Earth's pursuit of peace as a sign of weakness. As swiftly as they had acted, the humans withdrew, melting back into their roles as traders, diplomats, and explorers. The galaxy resumed its routines, ships traveled, and markets bustled. But an unspoken understanding spread like a whisper among the stars. If humanity reaches out with an olive branch, it's wise to grasp it. For in their other hand, they might just hold the power to shake the cosmos.
They never replied.
This is the United Terran Coalition heavy cruiser Baltimore of the planet Earth. We are sending greetings to all peace-loving beings in the galaxy.
The humanoid Thriven ambassador stopped struggling and looked up at the view screen.
Repeat. This is the United Terran Coalition cruiser Baltimore. We wish you everything good from our planet. It is our procedure to meet first contact with communication of your own. We mean no harm.
The insectoid captain nodded to their communications officer. This is the interplanetary race's starship Nostalgia. Do you understand this transmission? The humans never replied. This was the first exchange between the Federation of Interplanetary Races and the United Terran Coalition. The Federation warship had been summoned to gather information on the war between the Thriven Republic and the Coalition. The Coalition had appeared out of nowhere on the edge of Thriven Republic and immediately opened fire. The Thriven immediately demanded military action from the Federation, but they weren't a highly thought-of nation, and there were other businesses to attend to. War was a dirty business after all, and they'd just come out of one 10 years before. The Coalition wasn't invading anyone else anyway. What was the big deal? Nevertheless, they did have a job to do, and the Nostalgia's battle group was dispatched to investigate. The Thriven had lost a few colonies, after all, and they needed to be sure there weren't any sapient rights abuses. They'd met with a Thriven government official who briefed them on the situation. Not that it was very useful. In the words of the Nostalgia's Altavel captain, they lie through their teeth as a way of greeting. The Federation weren't saints by any means, but no one particularly liked the Thriven. There was little they could do about them, though. They had a potent fleet, and no one felt like dealing with them. It would cost too much. Even what few bits of truth that could be gained from the Thriven were valuable, though. Truth be told, nobody knew anything about this coalition except the message they sent to the first Thriven craft to meet them.
We, the United Terran Coalition, the people of Earth, greet you. Humanity has a message for you. If you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favors nor your hate.
They'd taken 3 colonies by the time the Nostalgia made it to the Thriven border. Their orders had changed. They were to intervene and immediately put an end to the war. The only Thriven military vessel to escape the initial carnage returned to base soon after the Nostalgia arrived. It delivered a second and final message. Humanity has a message for you. To beguile the time, look like the time. Bear welcome in your eye, your hand, your tongue. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. The Thriven ambassador told them the Terrans were irrational and refused all communications. They didn't know them. They didn't know what they looked like. They were strange in their behavior. Not too unusual, just a little note. They didn't bomb or invade the planets they took. They simply destroyed or occupied the orbital equipment and moved on. A fleet remained to guard each colony. Captain Ornut, the Nostalgia's commander, was thankful for that. Fear wasn't a war crime after all. It saved the paperwork. He'd brought his battlecruiser to confront the nearest Terran flotilla he could find, to approach them as an independent party and find out what was going on. That certainly ruffled the Thriven's feathers, if they had any. The bipeds were ugly things, mammalians without scales, feathers, or exoskeletons. Ornut never understood how they made do without his race's mandibles. He thought with some idle amusement that if they looked anything like his people, perhaps these humans were just disgusted by the Thriven. Curiously, the Thriven ambassador grew more and more nervous the closer their ships came to human territory. Ornut knew the Thriven were hiding something. They always were. But this was the first time he'd seen one concerned, rather than arrogant. He'd been in a fit when they'd come into the system, and he'd demanded they open fire when they got into communications range. And then, the ambassador froze when that alien voice crackled from the speakers. Ornut spoke to the Baltimore and opened a dialogue. The humans were not willing to pull out of Thriven territory naturally. They were surprisingly gentle with the Federation ship, despite their initial messages. Ornut wondered if they'd realized the depth of their mistake, or were creating a false sense of security. There were more details that Ornut found curious. The humans began with a force of cruisers and destroyers. Their names weren't that unusual for any race, but there was something about them. Baltimore, Harbin, and Perm for the cruisers. Whitaker and Mandel for the destroyers. Cities and people. The humans were extremely even-handed with the Federation. They went out of their way to be kind. Nothing like the monsters they were made out to be by the Thriven. It was a surprise when it was found that the humans looked very similar to the Thriven. Ornut would have thought that any biped humanoids, with their typical revulsion to bugs, would despise the Altavel. But why did they hate the Thrivens so much? They'd made many concessions to the Federation in their opening meeting, but never explained that. It got to the point that during their initial face-to-face diplomatic meeting, the captain asked their ambassador bluntly, "Why do you hate the Thriven? What did they ever do to you?" The human ambassador fixed the quadruped with a smoldering gaze from his small, immobile eyes. "We're at war. Yes, but why? Ask them." Ornut got only a bewildered answer from the Thurvan ambassador. The human's gaze only worsened. "We do not quarrel with the Federation. We are kind to everyone we contact, so you have the chance we never did. But we will not stop hunting them until their homeworld falls." "The chance you never did?" Ornut asked. "What is this about? You didn't communicate, you didn't hail them, you just sent cryptic messages." "We've been at war for 200 years. "But you said you only made it into space 50 years ago." The human nodded. "I did." He placed a data recorder on a desk. All human representatives in the room turned to look. A scratchy yet presentable audio recording played. "As the Secretary General of the United Nations, an organization of the 147 member states who represent almost all of the human inhabitants of the planet Earth. I send greetings on behalf of the people of our planet. We step out of our solar system into the universe seeking only peace and friendship, to teach if we are called upon, to be taught if we are fortunate. We know full well that our planet and all its inhabitants are but a small part of the immense universe that surrounds us, and it is with humility and hope that we take this step." The humans smiled strangely. It was some sort of pleasant memory. Then a terrible squeal came through the speakers. The voices were different, recorded with another sort of microphone. There was no formality, there was nothing but impromptu statements, desperate statements. Panicked voices washed over one another. "Reading hundreds of large objects, too many to track. This is Houston, Houston, do you read? London, do you copy? We're going to try and stay on the air, but we've detected impacts in major cities. Washington, come in. St. Louis, come in. This is Houston. Houston, do you copy? Baltimore, this is Houston Control, come in please. Canaveral, this is Houston, do you read? Come in please." More speakers entered the channel. It was stitched together from different sources. Some read off numbers and tracking data, others reported observations, and some just called for help in a litany of languages. "London, terrible devastation. Reports Berlin has been destroyed. Obliterated. Washington, please come in. This is the Nimitz. We just saw total loss. Emergency." The recorder hissed sharply, and one final voice came through. "ISS to Mission Control, come in please. Where are you, Houston? Come in please." The recorder squealed. "Isn't there anyone on the air? Anyone? Isn't there anyone out there?" The human ambassador pulled out an old-fashioned piece of paper. We reached out our hands in peace and friendship, and the first thing they did was hurl asteroids at us. We defended ourselves when we could barely even tell if it was a ship or another asteroid, and their response was to try to take out our capitals. And when we defend ourselves, they destroy our world. 3 billion died in the bombardment, and billions more followed. And we've spent centuries just getting back." He narrowed his gaze at the Thriven. "And they're the ones who did it." The document was a compilation of data. It showed an object in high orbit above a planet with a radar scan, a variety of numbers and figures, and a photo from a telescope. The object in orbit had the same profile as a Thriven cruiser. It was old, but still similar enough to be recognized. "All refugees report to Handling Station 1. The depressing sound of feet shuffling echoed throughout the station. Human soldiers watched and guarded the seemingly never-ending mass of helpless civilians trying to flee the compound. I was one of those refugees. My home, Janoxla, was raised by a compound war fleet. I was one of only 1,500 to make it off the surface. Over 2.5 billion were bombarded before they could escape on the space elevators. Humanity, Terra, was the closest safe harbor for refugees in the local star cluster. Janoxla was the 5th planet to fall. In the time it took to evacuate to Terran space, another 4 would be completely razed. Only the 10th planet, Genox Prime, was able to put up some resistance and allow significant amounts to escape the surface. Of the million who made it off the planet, only around 100 were able to trickle back into the galaxy. Everyone else would be killed, but I knew none of this at the time. We were all tired and scared, hopeful that human neutrality would be respected. For more than a millennium, humankind stayed neutral throughout every conflict. Humanity grew incredibly rich as a result. Everyone knew investments in humanity would be incredibly stable. Human industry, technology, and their economy were all the stuff of legend. I truly thought that given the human reputation, the compound would stop at the long-respected human border. When alarms began screaming, I realized I was mistaken. A missile had slammed into the loading docks of the station. It was only by standing close to a human soldier that I survived. In his quick thinking, he grabbed onto me and threw me to the ground. When the atmosphere and everything inside it began to be vented out of the station, he held me in place. I was one of 20 who survived the decompression. Once the soldier realized what was going on, he dragged me to a nearby airlock. His magnetic boots were the only thing that saved me from death that day. His own life, too, for that matter. The only reason I survived was a pair of fucking boots. "We gotta move fast. Ready?" The soldier slammed his fist on the door release, and the two of us bolted towards the life pods nearby. We joined a large group inside a small escape pod. All of them were human. The doors closed only seconds after I got on. Once again, my life was saved by the slimmest of margins. The view? It can only be described as surreal. The beauty of Neptune, its swirling clouds and torrential storms of blue, horribly contrasted by the station exploding before my very eyes. So many were killed in such a short time, it's overwhelming to think that I would have been among the dead. Should have been among the dead. So many times. Yet I survived, my eyes filled with the vision of a lone human corvette fighting an entire compound fleet. The soldier who saved me could only look on in rage. "Give 'em hell, Olympia!" The vessel fought valiantly against the horde. Engines firing with rage, the little ship darted around compound fire. It decimated 3 enemies with overwhelming kinetic firepower, ripping massive holes into the sleek and angular vessels assaulting my kind. 3 compound ships were torn to ribbons, made into unrecognizable heaps of twisted alloy. The ship continued its maneuvers for what seemed like hours before it was finally hit by a compound plasma charge. The entire stern of the vessel was melted clean off, the proud and powerful engines turned to slag in an instant. The little ship stopped maneuvering, but couldn't stop its momentum. The melted hulk plowed past the compound fleet into the greater expanse of the void. Whatever crew remaining decided to fight until their last breath, firing defiant railgun volleys through the ever-furthering void. They managed a few superficial hits before they faded out of visual range. Without the little ship to draw the compound's fire, we became their #1 priority target. Plasma charges missed our puny vessel by mere meters, melting away our armor and noticeably increasing the temperature inside our doomed craft. Just then, a message seemed to reverberate through the very void itself. "Human neutrality is non-negotiable. Prepare for eviction." As if appearing out of nothingness, an entire human battle fleet emerged from the void. The newfound firepower bore down upon the compound like a hammer to an anvil. Railgun rounds slammed through the hulls of vessels who'd only just finished purging my planet. Massive chunks of metal were ripped out of the compound vessels one by one. After such mighty blows, they simply ceased to fight back. Transformed by human lead into hulking wrecks, completely gutted and devoid of any means to retaliate. Compound ships attempted to reorganize, firing blind volleys of plasma and missiles into the general region of human vessels. Every shot either completely missed or was absorbed by ludicrously powerful human shielding. The humans began their second assault, even more awe-inspiringly devastating than the last. Massive flocks of missiles arose from massive human ships like an angry swarm of bees. Cutting through compound ships like a hot knife through butter, the destruction was almost hard to watch. My heart was conflicted by the slaughter. These compound scum had just finished murdering my entire home planet. Yet there was something so pathetic about the resistance they could muster. It was like watching a field of grass being cut by a scythe, completely helpless and unable to defend themselves. Some compound vessels tried to flee into FTL, only to crash into an invisible net of unimaginable proportions. I saw the telltale blinking of FTL drives spooling up, appearing successful for multiple seconds. After 10 seconds, light caught up to current events, and the ships slammed into the human wall, exploding in a vibrant display of blues, whites, oranges, and red. The majesty of the destruction swallowed my mind and distracted me from the gravity of my situation. The killing blow was executed by the massive human battleships. Limitless beams of white exited the spinal mount of human ships. They connected with their targets, similarly massive compound supercarriers, architects of the destruction of species. I doubted the humans' capability to destroy such a ship for less than a second. For that was the time it took the beam to claw its way through the entire supercarrier. Each surviving compound vessel was gutted from bow to stern in a matter of milliseconds. I'd never felt more powerless and insignificant in my life. I haven't felt such a feeling since. My entire species had almost been eradicated by the compound. This single human fleet cut them down like a field of wheat. I jolted in fear when the human soldier placed his hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now." His voice showed me that he too felt puny in the face of such madness. His words were as much reassurance to himself as they were to me, yet I was able to derive some comfort from them. Hundreds of compound vessels were turned to molten heaps of scrap in minutes, and I couldn't truly process it. I owe my life to the humans. I just wish they would have helped us sooner. Testimony of Talon II, lone survivor of the compound assault on Genoxla. Only around 100 Genox citizens survived the war. The compound nearly succeeded in the total eradication of their species. Human peacekeeping actions as a direct result of Talon's confirmation of genocide turned human opinion towards intervention in the war. The compound government was tried and convicted of genocide, and a new interim government was established by the galactic nations. Humanity now views intervention in conflict as its duty in the galaxy. Human interventionists have stopped a total of 97 interstellar conflicts to date. The guns of Terra reign supreme, stopping conflicts within minutes and preventing conflicts with the mere acknowledgement of their existence.
Is that thing even worth repairing? A human ship dropped out of FTL and sent a docking and repair request. Arcanus, the docking master, puffed with annoyance. Another human ship, taking up valuable space and resources. Didn't these barely evolved apes know that the starbase had important Gelgian battlecruisers in need of repair? No one could spare time for the humans' clunky old junkers. But the fleet was nothing if not fanatical about tradition, which meant that humans had not yet joined its ranks. Instead, they just did their own thing as part of the Galactic Confederation. It meant they didn't have access to the newest technology, but it also kept them out of everyone else's business. When the war started, and the human government had volunteered their soldiers, the response had mostly been one of humor and exasperation. So the fleet assigned humanity basic tasks and out-of-the-way duties. And now this bucket of bolts was coming into Arcanus' starbase and, albeit politely, she had to grant them that, requesting help. She sighed and sent a request asking what they would need. A short moment later, her communicator pinged and the list arrived. As she scrolled down, her annoyance was replaced by equal parts shock and outrage. This ship was more whole than hull. There wasn't a single external panel that wasn't burned, shot away, or riddled with laser fire. The humans had apparently sealed themselves within an inner hull tub and were wearing exosuits for life support. Their engines had just managed the jump to the space dock before the FTL crystals had cracked into a million pieces. Their external docking gear had been completely shot off, which would necessitate a place within the space dock, a spot that was at a definite premium. Arcanus flexed her tentacles. The Confederation space dock couldn't refuse, not when the humans were forced to wear exosuits. She'd have to clear a space so they could at least leave their ship. Then she'd have that thing junked and the station chief would have to send the humans back, wherever on the next transport. One of her tentacles flicked a button and transmitted a response to the ship. Arcanis opened her communication. "I've cleared pad 93 for you. Prepare for our tractor beams to engage and guide you in." The channel crackled, and then a somewhat muffled voice responded, "If it's all the same to you, we made sure to spare enough deuterium to fly in on our own." Arcanis sighed, scanned the ship again, then spoke. "Your ship is in pieces. One wrong move and you could rip out half the docking ports." There was a pause in response. "It is kind of a point of pride for my crew, you see." Arcanis clicked her jaws. Her species knew about the pride of limping your own way home. And if you couldn't limp, you crawled. She began to wonder if the humans weren't as much of a joke as she had always heard. She sent a reply that she approved of the request. Then, with growing interest, she left her office to make her way to pad 93. She wanted to meet these silly humans who had a sense of pride that was so clearly close to her own species. As the human ship landed, the one remaining stabilizer creaked and then snapped off with an echoing bang. Arcanis flinched slightly at the sound. She only had to wait a few moments before the crew of 5 was able to exit, having partly sheared the door off. They had at least been able to finally remove the helmets from their exosuits. "What happened? Did an Eshar ship stumble onto you?" Arcanis asked. One of the shorter humans, the one with darker hair, laughed. "I guess you could say that. What you are requesting from our stores is a large amount of hardware, weapons, and work. That is a large request when we have battle cruisers in need of repairs and refit." The tall woman nodded, understanding. "If you could just get us back into flying shape, we could make our way back to a human sector and handle the rest of the repairs." Arcanis felt that grudging admiration again, but before she could say anything, they were interrupted by the arrival of a GC fleet officer. Arcanis inwardly groaned. During times of peace, she didn't have to deal with these arrogant asses, and she much preferred it that way. "Your heap is taking up valuable space. Docking Master, remove this scrap as soon as possible. The Kralians have a Star Dreadnought in need of immediate repair." Arcanis had seen the work order for the Star Dreadnought. The admiral in charge wanted to retrofit a storage bay into an arboretum for his mistress. In spite of this, the Kralians were the military heavyweights of the Confederation. But it still stuck in her craw. The easy smiles of the humans were all gone now. "What did you call my baby?" one of the other men demanded. The tall woman of the group put a restraining hand on his arm. "Your fleet?" she asked. The fleet officer looked like he was being talked to by something particularly disgusting. "Yes." She held out a data chip. "Here's a copy of our combat report for fleet intelligence." The officer gingerly and grudgingly took it before turning around and marching off. The tall woman now looked warily at Arcanis. Arcanis had been examining the hull of the ship. "This hull must be at least 50 years old," she exclaimed. "Yes, an excursory Mechanon II served as the frame," the tall woman replied. "Ah, that takes me back to my hatchling days. Those ships could run on backwater rotgut and with half their systems out." The smile slowly returned to the face of the tall woman. "Yes, she certainly has proven her worth beyond measure. I wasn't sure we could have taken down those 3 Eshar cruisers and gotten away with our hides intact." Arcanis spluttered. "3? 3 cruisers? But what? But how?" Several of the humans now seemed to be almost laughing. They all slowly made their way over to the edge of the pad to sit down. "Well, you know, these old excursories were built around a mass driver for pushing asteroids into new orbits?" Arcanis nodded. It wasn't glorious work, which is why crews worked with these tubs back in the day. "Well, we reworked the mass driver into an autocannon that accelerates projectiles to shortly before the speed of light." The tall woman threw out the information as if saying she had just walked down the corridor to purchase a snack. "Then we put some weapons hardpoints onto the hull, whatever we have on hand, and you have a very tough and passable gunship. We call these things warthogs after—" "Where did we get the name from Brisby?" The man who had been defensive about the ship replied, "Some flying animal from old Earth, I think." The woman shrugged and nodded. "But 3 Eshar cruisers?" "We had been sent to patrol some nowhere sector when we picked up 3 Eshar ships on long-range scanners. No one else was in the area. My people were itching for a bit of revenge after Polarnus 3, so we went at it. Of course, waiting around in a half-destroyed ship until one's patrol relief comes wasn't much fun." Arcanis nodded. Polarnus III had been a tragedy for humanity. It was one of their breadbasket planets and supposedly safe behind GC lines and therefore had little in the way of military protection. But somehow 12 Eshar ships had appeared out of nowhere, glassed the planet, killing 150 million, and then disappeared again. Wait a minute. You destroyed 3 cruisers, lost half your ship, and still waited around until you were relieved? Arcanis couldn't believe her hearing stalks. Well, we had a couple of autocannon rounds left, one of the other men joked. Arcanis pulled out her work tablet, tapped twice. The Warthog was now at the top of the repair list. Fleet would throw a fit, but if they were to watch the data chip, then maybe they'd change their mind. Arcanis certainly had. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for the next story. The Blink Drive. It was a strange and massive contrast between the black and gray hulled warships of the human Sol Confederacy and our golden hulled warships of the Iridian Empire. The stark contrast in size was more apparent than we could have imagined. Their largest warship, the SCS Supernova, was a fifth the size of one of our battleships. If I didn't already know the history of these ships, I would be laughing at how small they were. The largest ships were also the least heavily armed, ships known as carriers, whose only visible weapons were point defense weapons. I look over at one of the ships escorting the Terran fleet, the Grand Inquisitor. Our ship is 6 times the size of the 5 battleships that are escorting it. The human battleships are heavily armed like ours, bristling with cannons and other weaponry. I almost laughed as I thought of how someone took a shrink ray to humanity's war fleets after they were built. There was obviously something I was missing. Obviously, humanity has survived the last 7 invasions from Council war fleets. Obviously, they have some advantages. I couldn't see it at all, though. Well, we would see soon enough. My High Lord! Incoming Sarasani war fleet! Right on schedule, as they said. All ships to battle stations, shields to full front. Human warships, stay behind us and let us absorb the first volley, I commanded over our comms. Hera Squadron, copy that, falling back now, came the response. The voice over the comms was feminine and made us all shiver a bit. Oh, by the voided gods, why are human voices so enchanting? My ensign spoke out of turn as he readied our shields. I forgave this talk, though. Oh, they are very enchanting. Their voices have this quality to them, and their females are... I said, waving my hands in front of me to show the curves of a human female I saw on one of their stations. I allowed my crew a moment of levity as the tiny ships moved to the backlines in our formation. Perhaps that explains why this occurrence is happening? What is this for the humans now? Invasion number 8? Probably is. Tight beam range on the starboard shield to 30 degrees, port side shield to 34 degrees. As soon as that first video of humanity's greeting to the galaxy appeared, humanity hasn't had any peace. And, just so you know, the images in that video were very much real, I said as I commanded orders. Port side 34, starboard 30, set. With my commands followed, everyone registered the last statement I made. To the galaxy, humanity was a symbol of cuteness or a symbol of fertility when they first appeared. To almost all species, humanity's robust reproductive system was capable of interbreeding with almost anyone with little interference. A benefit of most galactic species being mammals. Humans are also exotic, being one of only 2 omnivores in the galactic stage. Symmetrical faces, short stature, and dense bone structure from a death world gave them an even greater mystique. Is it any wonder, then, that so many empires want to monopolize them in the easiest way available? Saranasi Warfleet transmitting in 3, 2, 1, engaged, comms officer announced to all ships. Charging main drives, shields to full. Do you remember our battle plan? The human admiral spoke over comms. Of course I do. Absorb the impact from their main drives with our shields, then keep you covered while you engage. Snap to it, they're about to fire, I barked. I watched with a bit of amusement as I saw the tiny warships disappear behind our fleet. My attention snapped back to the matter at hand as I saw blinding flashes of light erupt from the front of the enemy formation. Full blast of tight beam laser fire from spinal-mounted cannon arrays designed to precisely focus an energy source to a fine pinpoint. The purpose was to focus energy on shield sources to a specific point in the hopes of overloading them, a cheap tactic, one that my engineers were able to quickly overcome. The blast lasted 30 seconds. It was fortuitous that our shield systems overclassed most in the galaxy. In terms of weapons, we were outclassed surely, but a strong defense is just as good as a strong offense. It's how we held our own during the start of our own solar empire. Blast is over. 4 ships disengaging due to overload. The sun-kissed Alavi has lost engines. Ready main cannons to fire. Focus all effort on flagship escorts. Ignore targets of opportunity, I repeat. Focus all fire on flagship and dreadnought escorts only. I barked in the comms to all ships. Diverting energy to the main cannon. Rear shields are now offline. Secondary systems shut down. Main reactor at full capacity. The chief engineer barked over comms. This is the part that makes me nervous. I trust them, but I can't help but feel a little uneasy at the fact we have the fully armed warships of another species sitting behind us where we have no shields. We have no reason to fear them after all, but still, I said, thinking aloud. My High Lord, this is logistics. We have compiled the dataset you requested, O High One. The comms chimed just as I felt the shudder from the main cannon charging up. Excellent! Send the navigation data to the human admiral. He was the one who asked for it. I don't know why, but it's part of the plan. Ready capacitors. I barked and sat in my seat for the upcoming jolt. Capacitors! Charged and ready. All ships targeting completed. Guaranteed 100% hit rate with focused fire. They won't survive. Ensign spoke up as he read all the data being fed to him. Fire! I commanded. The ship angrily shuddered as the multi-gigawatt beam laser mounted in the ship's body whirred to life. Capacitors glared brightly within the tube deep inside the ship, a multi-focused array of laser emitters, mixed with an array of 100-meter-thick lenses, focused the energy into a tight, focused beam of energy. The laser light blinded us for a few seconds as the streak of God's light and fury shattered the darkness before us. Moments later, all of the 41 ships we aimed at were disabled. Shields and power systems overloaded. They disengaged and left to the back of the formation. The ones who weren't so lucky either melted from the sheer assault or went nova due to reactor detonation. 41 ships are gone. We now have the numerical advantage. Full power to shields! I yelled out as I saw the enemy flagship charge up again. Shields full power! Angled deflection is at 32 port side, 29 starboard, the engineer barked. We braced for impact and the beam of energy from the enemy warships hit us. Most ships just ignored it. I noticed outside my window, however, the human warships had appeared from behind us and were using the light from the cannon attacks to sneak up alongside us. Their ships were casually burning fuel just next to us. Close enough in some cases you could actually see the scratches in the paint from dock maintenance. What the hell are they doing? I said aloud as I saw the top antennae array of a cruiser appear below the bridge window. This is SCS Europa. Navigation data received and processed. Charging blink drive, please maintain overshield. The human comms spoke up. Affirmative. Shield deflection, port side 25, starboard 27. Keep those warships in your shield's view of influence. I ordered as the attack dissipated. There's our exit point. All ships full burn. Ready broadside. The human warships barked in response. Are they charging the enemy line? That's suicide. It will take them far too long to close that distance, I said, wondering what the hell they were thinking. Before I could voice my concerns, however, the human ships enveloped themselves in a wave of purple energy of some kind, then suddenly vanished. Mere microseconds later, they reappeared in the enemy battle line. I blinked, completely dumbfounded at the sight of what the void just happened. I grabbed a telescope. I had to take a close look at what was going on and saw a close view of a human warship unleashing a massive battery of ballistic cannon fire straight into the unshielded side of the enemy flagship. The human ships unleashed the full force of their arsenal straight into the side of the flagship, and then some kind of pods deployed shortly afterwards. They didn't look like escape pods, or at least nothing I had ever seen. Missiles as well. Thousands upon thousands of missiles blasted out of every human warship, and within seconds another 50 enemy ships had their engines blown away, disabling them and kicking them from the fight, if not outright destroying them completely. "We're in! Don't fire on the flagship! I have men aboard!" Damage is done, we are disengaging, the human admiral yelled through the comms. Suddenly it made sense. Suddenly I knew what they did. I ignored the how for now and focused on the objective. With our opponent further disabled, we now had the numerical and tactical advantage. This was something that so few empires have tried and failed to do. Humans had managed to successfully develop the tactics and strategy to board an enemy vessel and directly engage a fleet's leadership in abnormal conditions. This would change everything, and we were their allies. A sinister grin crept across my face. I got back to my senses and stood up at my station. Ready all cannons to fire! Fire at will on all targets of opportunity. Do not target the enemy flagship. Aye, my lord, all ships fire at will, do not target enemy flagship. Watch your crossfire, there are still allied warships in the enemy formation. The ensign barked into comms as the ship's capacitors shuddered to life. Enemy formation is collapsing, left flank on the enemy flagship is routing, the gunnery sergeant yelled out. Do not shoot at retreating or disabled enemy ships. Maintain your fire only to disable enemy targets. Do not finish targets off. I ordered again, bracing as the main cannon blasted out its godly fire. 3 more enemy warships went silent just as we received an open comm. Play that message! Ready fire! I ordered as I felt capacitors charge again. The screen appeared showing the enemy admiral on the bridge of his flagship with a human warrior aiming a gun at his head. This is the Marine Team Echo Squad. Your precious admiral now has a gun to his head. I'd suggest you disengage before I start pulling teeth. This statement took us all off guard. It did so to the enemy as well, and within a minute every ship the enemy had its shields down and lights indicating surrender now lit up. Engines died as the fleet gave up. Good dogs, the human said. Now, Admiral, if you don't want to be turned into a rug for my barracks bathroom, I'd suggest you fuck off back to where you came from, and don't bother us ever again. Get it? The enemy admiral didn't even register, and quickly screamed, "We give up no more!" as he ordered his ships to disengage. Within moments, any remaining enemy ship that could move immediately warped out. With the enemy line broken, I commanded everyone to move ahead and start rescue operations. The humans had already started doing this long before we even considered it, and some of their warships were using foam of some kind to douse several fires while incursion teams rescued enemies trapped inside destroyed ships. By the time I even considered ordering any rescue attempts, the humans had already secured our own ships that had been damaged in the fight. With a moment of calm to deal with casualties and damages, I called the human admiral. His image popped up on the screen. "Hello there, High Lord. Something you need?" "What in the holy void was that maneuver you pulled?" I asked, still recovering from the shock. "Blink strike. We use a blink drive to warp us into enemy formation, blow a hole in the side, send in a Marine team. Boom, victory. We've done it every time," he said rather frankly. "What the hell is a blink drive?" I asked, now noticing the other members of the crew were listening in. "Well, a blink drive is like a hyperdrive. Except instead of using the hyperlanes, it uses subspace to generate a warp bubble around a ship. This subspace bubble, as we know, is unstable. That's why we use hyperlanes for long-distance travel. If we use the blink drive in very short distances, it can be used en masse. In short, a blink drive is a directionally mounted miniature subspace drive. It's called a blink drive because if you blink, you miss it," he said with a smile. I blinked, coming to terms with the information I just got. Not only a stable form of subspace travel equipment that didn't interfere with the gravity wells of local planets, but also was safe to use on ships. I considered for a moment that if humanity were to stop being constantly at war, maybe they can better this tech for more economical purposes. I stood still and at attention. "Well, on behalf of the Iridian Imperium, I have a favor to ask regarding your blink drive technology in exchange for our continued and permanent alliance to the Sol Confederacy." "Go on," he said, stroking his hair-covered chin. "Can we get some of that shit?" "They made a weapon out of what?" Fleet Officer Seekless sighed, ran a hand over his thorax and stared at the data stick. It lay on his desk as if taunting him. He knew he would have to view it, write a report, and send it up the chain of command. That was the entirety of his job, but not what he had joined up for. He wanted to start out as a targeting officer on one of the plasma lance cannons, just raining indiscriminate destruction down onto a planet's surface from high orbit. Or maybe, in his wilder dreams, a fighter pilot. Instead, he was colorblind. He could barely see above 800 nanometers in wavelength, so he got shunted off into administration. He wasn't sure what secondhand embarrassment was waiting for him on the data stick, but he knew he needed a strong drink before he watched the human report on the stick. 5 minutes later, and a large glass of straight myelk in the hand, Sickless accessed the data stick. Half an hour later, his drink was still untouched. Fleet Station Commodore Selly's communicator pinged. She sighed. She wasn't in charge of the station itself, just everything having to do with the fleet on the station. Still, that was more than enough. Then she saw the name on the communicator. 3rd Sub-Lieutenant Sickless. "What does that little pissant want now?" she groaned. "A Kralian munitions barge probably docked 3 centimeters off-center from their landing pad, and he wants to requisition a squad to measure the deleterious effects on our orbit," her secretary Terrell said. "Motherfucker," she muttered. "Why haven't we replaced him with an AI yet and sent him off to waste reclamation? You owe Commander Frankel 350 credits from your last game of Setnak. Also, he conveniently looked the other way the last time you reclamated 2nd Sub-Lieutenant Scherf's stack of data sticks. You know they clogged up the physical waste recycler unit for 30 hours. Oh, shit. Don't even remind me of that self-important scrotal hair counter." Sellies paused, getting a bit suspicious. "What did happen to him, though?" "I believe you informed him that you had a standing order to space him if you ever saw him again." Sellies pondered. "I don't suppose I can give the same standing order for the 3rd Sub-Lieutenant, can I?" "I'm afraid the Fleet Stations Council can only look the other way when it comes to the occasional spacing. Besides, ma'am, we all know you can come up with something far more creative." Sellies smirked. Stars. She hated being stuck in a glorified chop shop and shit recycler, especially when she was saddled with so many fuck-for-brains junior officers. Unfortunately, Fleet Dreadnought Command had taken a poor view of her maneuvers at the Battle of Rosk 10 years ago. They had won her the battle, but they weren't traditional. Fucking inbred twits wouldn't know creativity if it bit them in their collective egg sacs. "Fine. We have to at least let him have his say." She rummaged around in her desk, pulled out her sidearm, checked to make sure it was loaded and the safety was off, then set it down on top of her desk where the red danger light was clearly visible. "Is that for us or him?" Terrell asked. "Maybe first him, then us. It might be the only way we'll ever escape this shit heap of an assignment." 3rd Sub-Lieutenant Sickless entered the room, the data stick clutched tightly in his hand, saw the sidearm on the desk and paused. He swallowed nervously. Fleet Commodore Sellies grinned, showing the tips of her 2 vestigial fangs. "Fleet Commodore, ma'am," Sickless stuttered out. "We have a new data stick from a human ship that just came and docked." Sellies groaned inwardly. It wouldn't surprise her if this Sickless actually needed help finding his own asshole. It was certainly beneath her duties to give a shit about any random ship coming into the station, and especially some human ship. She stroked the top of the sidearm with her fingertips and bared her fangs a bit more. "I thought you should see it, sorry Commodore, bye." Sickless spoke as quickly as he could, dropped the stick on her desk and bolted. Sellies raised an eye hood. "That might be a record." 30 seconds from coming into leaving, Terrell agreed. "Please make sure my sidearm remains in working order." Sellies put the safety back on and replaced it in her desk. "What should we do with that?" Terrell motioned to the stick. Sellies sighed. "Look over it, I suppose. On the off chance, the extremely off chance that it's anything worth my attention, let me know. Otherwise, dump it in the reclamator. Just to remind Frankel who's in charge of this shit heap." 2 minutes later, Terrell called Commodore Sellies into her office. 30 minutes later, Sellies called a meeting of the command officers, as soon as possible. 40 minutes later, the senior department officers had gathered in the main meeting room. "All right, you brain-dead assholes. You need to watch this." The Commodore popped the data stick into the viewer. The scene showed a small and clearly old human ship on an intercept course with 3 Eshar cruisers. Some of the officers started chuckling. A few of them started talking about how they were here to have a few laughs before getting back to work. Then the first Eshar cruiser was, well, it was shredded on the video. There was no other way to describe it. The cruiser had only managed to get one wild shot off before their ship became flying scraps. Over the next 20 minutes, they watched as the little human ship slugged it out with two Eshar cruisers simultaneously. When the video was over, the silence in the room was heavy. Did that little old bucket of rust and scrap just take down 3 Eshar cruisers? Captain Pelkes asked. It would seem so, Commodore Sellys said wearily. Well, I suppose even the most basic of species has to get lucky sometime, Commander Frankel said. The fleet intelligence officer Mullis was laughing. This shocked the assembled officers into a new silence. Mullis rarely spoke. During their regular meetings, he delivered his reports with a minimum of words, and that was it. He never cracked a smile, even though his race was well known for their refined sense of humor. He certainly never laughed. If he had friends, they would have claimed he was incapable of laughing. The rest of you really have no idea about humans, do you? Mullis asked. Everyone looked uncomfortable. Well, they're not very highly developed, Frankel began. Mullis waved his comment aside. In the Lovek conflict, human ships accounted for 73% of enemy casualties. What? Frankel spluttered. But they're not even really in the fleet. Yes, as they took part in various conflicts from the beginning of their time in the GC, it became clear that we were all better served by letting them do their own thing. What the fuck kind of fleet idea is that? Sellys asked. Not a single one of those limp dicks up there has ever had a creative idea since suckling their mother's royal jelly. If they did, I'd still be blasting the tits off Eshar assholes in a dreadnought. Mullis smirked. Look, humanity first took part on the side of GC forces during the succession crisis. They weaponized the planet of Frio. Frankel looked puzzled. So they put defenses in orbit over a useless planet? It didn't help. The planet was destroyed. No, Mullis said. You misunderstand me. They weaponized Frio. They turned the entire planet into one massive weapon. The stunned silence at this pronouncement lasted a moment. How the fuck did they turn an entire gas giant into a weapon? Sellys asked, stunned. Our best scientists still don't know, Mullis replied. Frio took out 3/4 of the succession fleet. But fleet just sends humans off to unimportant places. Well, no. Fleet actually sends humans off to classified places. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for the next story. Houston, this is Jupiter.